Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Patterson. I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region. And thank you for joining us for our Seeing Our World, a visual journey through history. And with me is Kile Clabaugh and Roland Schendel, and I'll let them introduce themselves real quick.
Hi, my name is Kile Clabaugh. I'm the project coordinator for Teaching with Primary Sources Western Region, and I also teach in the journalism department at Metropolitan State University of Denver.
Hello, I'm Roland Schendel, and I'm an associate professor of elementary education and literacy at MSU of Denver.
And our contact information is there. I just wanted to skip back real quick to the previous one, just to make you all aware that this presentation and other resources are available in that folder. Just look for this title, the Seeing Our World, a visual journey through history. And I'd recommend that you pause the video now and just go there real quick and grab this as you can, because it'll be helpful as we go through some of our hands-on activities to have access to your own copy of them. So if you just grab that real quick, and then we'll move forward. All right, just moving forward. So we all work for a grant with the Library of Congress called Teaching with Primary Sources. And so I just wanted to give a quick introduction to the Library of Congress. The Teaching with Primary Sources program is a program that basically helps educators access the resources at the Library of Congress. And also our other big goal is really to make effective practice of using primary sources in the classroom, which are widely available at the Library of Congress. We're not going to go very deeply into those resources at the Library of Congress, but I did want to make you aware that pretty much everything that we're going to be using is available for free at the Library of Congress at loc.gov. Feel free to contact us, and we can help you with with how to access that website effectively. And we'll just talk a little bit more about what's actually available there. So just as a brief overview, the Library of Congress really is the nation's library. It was basically founded in 1800, which at the very founding of our country, that they realized that it was important to have a library for Congress to have all the best information possible. It was the original Library of Congress was in the Capitol, which was burned down during the War of 1812. And so they rebuilt it out of a collection from Thomas Jefferson, and they actually purchased about 6,500 books from him to rebuild that library. And that collection is still at the core of the Library of Congress today. Then you can visit that if you go out to Washington, D.C. Today, they continue to collect not just books, but all sorts of materials across the gamut, really to make sure that they're collecting the best information for those people at Congress, and also make it widely available to the American people. And like it says there, with well over 170 million items in the physical collections, and many, many more in the digital collections. You can see there the collections include millions and millions of different things, including manuscripts, books, visual materials, sheet music, maps, audio items, moving images, 3D objects, with well over 60 million of those being available at loc.gov online for free for your use. They belong to all of us, and our grant really is intended to make sure that educators are aware and can effectively use those resources. Just a last thing before we dive into the presentation, just to make you aware, our office at Metropolitan State University of Denver is one of 3 regional centers that are shown there. The TPS program is a national program, and there's hundreds of programs and partners throughout the country. One of the things we do out of our office is offer grants up to $20,000 to integrate materials from the Library of Congress into existing educational programs. Typically, these are done through school districts, university, cultural institutions. If you have any interest in doing this kind of work, or doing a grant, or even just learning more, please contact us. There's more information there at loc.gov/teachers, and then look for the TPS program on the sidebar, or contact me, Kyle, or Raleigh directly, and we're happy to help in any aspect of the work we do. And as for our agenda today, we're going to be talking a little bit about historical thinking, and that's as a foundation for our work today, just to really set some skills, some thinking skills about about the work we do. Then we're going to go into one of our foundational tools, which is called primary source analysis. We're going to do a really quick walkthrough of a highly effective primary source analysis tool that you can use in your classroom. Then we're going to really explore a very exciting protocol called levels of viewing that help break down visual images using a very specific protocol and some different ways of looking at things. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time showing some extensions of these tools in the classroom, really to set you up for being able to do these things in your classroom when you go back to your students when you return to your classroom. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle to talk a little about historical thinking.
Sure. So these are the kind of 5 tenets of historical thinking, and this is from the Stanford History Education Group. Their website is listed in the presentation as well, but it's sheg.stanford.edu. They have a phenomenal number of historical thinking assessments and civic online reasoning and other free resources. They're a TPS consortium member, so we wanted to share these 5 aspects of historical thinking to be like a foundation for our analysis throughout these historical sources. So first we have multiple accounts and perspectives, all about corroboration, perspective, and bias. The analysis of primary sources all has to do with reading, viewing, listening really closely in order to reconstruct the argument that's made either in the primary source or in the primary source set. Sourcing is always an important thing, but it's not just sourcing where you got the information. It's also about understanding the who, what, where, when, why, and how it was created, so that you can gain a better understanding of the next step, which is historical context, and understanding really the ideologies of before and after and during the event that you're analyzing. And that last piece is the claim evidence connection. So it's all about fitting history into what actually happened and trying to come up with the best argument or the best story that you can for the sources that you're viewing and the events or people or whatever it is. So that next slide, these are some great prompts that you can give your students, and this chart is listed on the sheg.stanford.edu as well. But these are good prompts to give your students when they're looking at sources, just to kind of help them, to guide them through this process. So this is the primary source analysis tool that Keith had mentioned earlier. This is really a foundational activity that's meant to be done over and over and over again. So it kind of instills those thinking skills in your students in order for them to like compartmentalize their analysis when they're viewing. So it starts with it's really just 3 basic steps. It's what do you see, what do you think you know, and what do you wonder? So when we break those apart, we're able to see different things that we wouldn't otherwise see if we were just viewing it and coming to a conclusion right away. So this is really all about compartmentalizing our thinking and understanding how we view things when we deconstruct images or text or audio.
A couple things to think about if whether you're familiar with this or it's brand new to you right now. When you consider promoting access for your learners to text, and in this case, we're focused predominantly on viewing, but you think about an English language learner and the challenges that they face as they're striving to grow and catch up and capitalize on the strengths that they have to promote new strengths in other language arts. Using this see, think, wonder, this observe, reflect question really gives them the opportunity to showcase their strengths in viewing. So their background in viewing their world around them, they can use those strengths to build a foundation for reading and writing later, and certainly speaking. So one other thing to note is that this the compartmentalization of the thinking here forces your students to actually look at the finite and look at the small details in order to draw conclusions later. So they don't jump to conclusions. We force them to really look at the myopic, the tiny pieces of, let's say, a puzzle or an event or an experience or an interaction with a peer, anything. This mimics life, just really makes them take some time and think about what they're seeing in order to set the stage for what they think and ask questions about what they wonder. So the value of this tool is just nothing short of phenomenal. So be sure to mess with this this strategy in a number of ways, in a number of contexts and subjects.
One thing just mention real quick is that this is like a really low stakes type of activity that you can do with your students that doesn't require, you know, a deep amount of feedback or a high level of points associated with it. This is really just like a thinking foundational, like, let's get our thinking caps on, and here's how a good way to start doing it.
And I just want to point out that there is a link there, and if you've downloaded this presentation, you can click that, or it's awfully long and hard to remember. So just Google Library of Congress Primary Source Analysis Tool, and this will pop right up. And they have this available. We have this one marked up, but they have this actually as a blank PDF that you can fill in. And they also have different versions of it. They give you prompts for each of these for different kinds of media. So it's a very well thought out and easy tool to use, and we really consider it to be foundational for primary source analysis.
Yeah, so
a couple things to consider real quick before we jump on. I think when you bring up the prompts, Keith, that's an amazing scaffold for teachers and for students. But another way to mess with this and tweak it is to have our students, you know, create those questions themselves. So when we jump back into this, when we think of, Kyle mentions low stakes. So for some students, this is totally low stakes. Like rattle off the things you see, 1 word, 2 word, whatever. And then you've got an accelerated learner who actually lives this process and has learned through it, maybe with you or maybe with a previous teacher. Or their language development just lends it to supporting this process for them. You can have them jump further, and as an extension, have them create the questions that go along with each stage or each compartment.
yeah, great idea, Raleigh. And so one of the activities that we do with this is just a mystery photo, which is give your students a random photograph that or an image or something that has to do or doesn't have to do with the lesson you're going to involve in for that day or whatever it is, but start in the process here. So we could just model this real quick if we want here. What do we see? What observations do we see with this photo?
Well, right off the bat, I see, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 men.
Striped pants.
I see what appears to be in the man in the middle appears to be holding a gun.
US, the letters US.
And I see US both on his hat and on a button or a belt buckle on his in his belly area there.
Yeah, and you'll see, so this step is really about those finite myopic details that don't they might not be significant, but you don't know that yet. So we're not making any assumptions about who these people are or what they're doing. We're just saying US, 4 men, and not jumping to that next step. So the next step then is creating a hypothesis. It's reflections. So what do you guys think we know about this image?
I think that this is some sort of political cartoon because it's drawn.
Mm.
And it appears to be some sort of caricature of some sort. Or caricatures, I guess, in this case.
Yeah, I think it covers many time periods.
And the best question as a teacher you can ask when a student says something like that is, why do you think that, Raleigh?
I see, going back to see different facial expressions and different, even just noticing the differences in the hats kind of strike a chord with me and help me remember that I've seen variations of these hats throughout, history.
Awesome.
I also think that at least the person in the middle appears to be in some sort of military uniform. And I think that because I've seen this sort of thing in military officers in earlier American pictures, maybe around Civil War time-ish, especially the belt buckle. I think that is very common like in a Civil War era photograph.
Yeah, great. So these are great hypotheses to just start connecting the claims with the evidence and seeing what we can come up with our own arguments. So now that next step is, what do you wonder about the image? Let's formulate some questions about it.
I wonder, Keith brought this up as some cartoon propaganda, but I wonder if it is, US propaganda or for other countries.
I'll go back to just the who, what, when, where, why. I'm, who are these people? What specifically is this this document or this image? When was it created? Where was it created? Get back to Raleigh's question. Where was it created? Is something in the United States? Was something in another country? Why was it created? Is it propaganda? Was it? Is there something we're not seeing in the frame here, like a caption, or was this in a newspaper? Who was the audience? All those sorts of things.
Yeah, those
Oftentimes, go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to say, those are all great questions. And I think the thing that Keith really highlighted was what's not in the photograph. What don't we see in here? And it's like, you can do that with each of your observations and reflections. I don't see any women, for example. I don't see any people of color. So you can do that throughout your things to help suss out that context. Go ahead, Riley.
Yeah, I wonder, oftentimes a caricature is drawn from a model, like an actual person. And I wonder if that was the case in any one of these, like maybe one, and then they realized, no, we've got to depict this figure in this way. So I just wonder what role like actual people play in the modeling of this.
Yeah, that's an interesting, something I always think about when things are drawn is that the artist had to make choices, and usually the choices are all for a purpose. And so I think you're probably right. These are probably based on probably specific people or specific iconography.
Yeah, and this is great. So this is really what the primary source analysis is all about. It's about just looking at it and saying, hey, what can I figure out about this without seeing any captions or any summary or any textbook that goes with it, and using our own thinking skills and our own knowledge base to bring about whatever we know. And then we can use those questions to help us do further research and find out if we were right about whatever our observations or reflections were. The one thing I will note about this observe reflect question primary source analysis tool is that we just did it really, really fast. You want to take some time with each of these steps and let students really kind of suss out anything that might be important.
With that being said, Kyle, I want to piggyback on that. Absolutely. You might even use this image or this set of images or others or text set, and you actually have them showcased and you use it as a transition tool. So every time your students come in to the classroom over days and weeks, you have the same images or different images, but you're only asking, what do you see? And in essence of remote learning, all this can be done through something like a Jamboard. So you have you're just focusing on the C, and students ease into the learning experience and they view this and they're just rattling off, I see hats, I see pants, I see stars, I see these pieces. And then to move on to, or to capture those examples that actually move to the next level and sort those with students and say, what do you notice about the difference between what you guys see? So these are specific little bits and pieces, but these are actually ideas that come from background knowledge, so to speak, or greater amounts of background knowledge. So yeah, as Kyle's suggesting, mess with this, let it like really drip out of the tree, so to speak, and develop over time. Or, sometimes just throw something up there and they start rattling off and you just collect everything, and it's almost like a list group label where you're all, wait, these are different responses. How might these fit into categories? So you can unpack it from that direction.
Nice. Yeah, great thoughts. So let's go on to to breaking this analysis down into an even deeper level of thinking with the levels of viewing that that we've created for this, based on the levels of listening. And Raleigh, if you want to give an overview of this before we start in on the process.
Yeah, I mean, you can read for yourselves there in the purposes, and this is no surprise to you, but our students are just immersed in this amazing world of viewing and, images and videos and advertisements and all these pieces of information. These texts are, surrounding us every day. And wouldn't it be powerful and purposeful, just like teaching the levels of listening? When you want to teach kids how to listen, you say, hey, listen carefully. And usually that means that they cross their hands and they stare at you and quit fidgeting or whatever, and they act like they're listening. But what if they actually knew what that meant? So just like that, teaching the levels of viewing, instead of saying, view this carefully, or take a moment to view this, what if we actually said, view this strategically? And they're like, okay. Or view this appreciatively. Oh, there's a different purpose in how I'm viewing this. So this levels of viewing task card is meant to help you to generate ideas for actually teaching the levels of viewing and supporting your learners. One thing I want to note before we dig in is that if you haven't been teaching through task cards, we would strongly encourage you to do so. A task card essentially is another teacher in your classroom, whether it be visual or through written language, to guide learners when you're not able to be there. The more we kind of break them up and meet their individual needs or shared needs as a small group, the better we can further their momentum and help them develop and reach their potential. Task cards can help us do that. So take this task card as an example for what you might do or use with your learners in your classroom. The instructions, they're fairly elaborate because we've got quite a bit of information on this slideshow, but we're going to kind of walk through the first 4 or 5 steps. And then that's going to lead to our step 6, which is creating questions that guide viewing at each level. Fortunately for you, we're going to scaffold this process and we're going to model it, and then hopefully you stop at some point and practice it yourselves. So what we need to do real quick is jump back to slide 7, and this is historical thinking. And you can either do that right now and move yourself back, or you can just remember what that entails. Essentially, the levels of viewing are a bridge or a vessel for promoting historical thinking. So if and when we teach our students how to view discriminatively, appreciatively, strategically, precisely, and critically, we help them get to the point of thinking historically. So think about all those 5 levels of viewing in this case and how they fit with this historical thinking process. So we really want you to keep that in mind as we walk through our first model. So the task card suggests that we, in keeping historical thinking in mind, we actually go through and read the characteristics of this level of viewing. So as we read through those, we're going to kind of use a think aloud to do this, and we're going to apply the process for you as a model. But all the while think, how might this vary? How might this be changed to, support kids further, challenge them, scaffold for them, so on and so forth. So discriminative viewing involves identifying individual objects and subjects. So, okay, a man.
Yeah, I see some text there. I want you for U.S. Army, nearest recruiting station.
It makes me think the subject is you, then, not not Uncle Sam.
Well, certainly I think it's like reinforced with the finger, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look what we've done. We've just gone from see to think immediately, And we might force our students at this point to push back to seeing. So identifying individual objects and subjects, just, okay, so what do you see? Let's start with the littlest things.
Yeah, sure. So it looks like he has pursed lips, like he's like pursing his lips for some reason.
He's got a hat with stars on it,
Red, white, and blue.
You see red, white, and blue throughout, including red, and blue stripes around the border.
Yeah, and thinking of compositional awareness too, or that textual cues, with the U being so big and different colored.
See, there's some sort of, it looks like a signature. It says I think it says Montgomery flag.
Furrowed brow.
White hair on the guy.
The other compositional thing too is that space below the nearest recruiting station that's just empty, which is weird considering the rest of the poster.
Yeah, so let's use that as a segue, Kyle, to I think. So what do you think with respect to that space?
Well, yeah, it makes me think that, maybe they sent the federal government or something sent these out to the states or to the cities, and then they could put in, right in the recruiting station, wherever they post it.
Yeah, the address for it or whatever. Yep. I think compositionally, the I want for U.S. Army being in black with red border and then switching out the U for red with black border really puts an emphasis on the reader as being that person that they want.
Mm-hmm.
And also the U is slightly larger font, so they have some interesting compositional and non-verbal cues as we would be looking at the discriminative points here.
I would think too that the color in U might be purposefully matched with the color of the bow tie and the impression that a bow tie gives as in importance or stature. So I'm thinking there might be a distinct purpose between that color match.
Also, just the red, white, and blue, and links to patriotism. That's a connection I would make. Sort of that I think step. So being a very patriotic thing, using the iconography of who I would assume is Uncle Sam because it's one of the most iconic pictures of Uncle Sam. So using that iconography and that connections to patriotism to call upon that to evoke an emotion out of the reader.
So let's go ahead, Kyle.
Sorry, that Keith, that's just a really good point about the sources that you choose for this can obviously be anything for your needs, but choosing like symbols can really help students or images that they've seen before in previous lessons or something that they've seen before and can deconstruct it on a different level than they've ever done before. So that's a good
yeah. So then think about where we're headed right now and where we're pushing into other areas and trying to bring our students back to thinking specifically about this list and then moving to wonder. Like, what are questions that are associated with this list of characteristics? And this is where you might really challenge your students to come up with the questions that showcase these characteristics of this level, which is discriminative viewing. So any questions, gentlemen?
That's just kind of like a great lesson in language and like a language arts lesson in rewording phrases to be questions. But a good question would just be, what do you think his facial expression means in this picture?
Yeah, there's tons of nonverbal stuff in here. I just wonder, why the stern action of the finger pointing directly at the person. There's a certain seriousness that comes out of his expression and his posturing and his hand positioning and everything.
You think about like bits and pieces that you might expect to see. So what's missing? What if he were smiling? What message would that send?
Just wondering what time period this would be from, and why, you know, it was so important to create such an item.
Yeah, and those are great extension activities too. You know, create one that's, instead of it being Uncle Sam, make it be Aunt Samantha or something, and see how that.
Or connect it. I mean, we can make an assumption. I think most people connect this with World War I and World War II military recruiting or army recruiting. But how could this be modified to be a piece of public service message for today? Like, I want you to put on your COVID mask. And I think a lot of people do those sorts of things. They take these iconic propaganda, basically, of yesteryear, and then apply it to modern day, which is a fun thing that they can find and tie to their own lives, to your students, their own lives.
Those are great points, because then you can consider transitioning to something more practical and more home based, which might be, you know, classroom rules or expectations for students and their behaviors, and how might this concept be transitioned to picking up after yourself, completing your homework, doing your reading regularly, so on and so forth.
Go.
Now let's apply the same process to the next level of viewing. In this case, it's critical. So we're going to go ahead and look at the characteristics of the critical level of viewing and use the process for observe, reflect, question, or see, think, wonder to experience this visual.
Well, I see people in red on one side, and then people with blue and green and other colors on the other side.
I see buildings around and in the background. I see that there's some text towards the lower third of the page in different fonts, and it looks like there was a handwritten note at the bottom.
I see
a dog.
A dog, yeah. I wonder what that dog is doing there. I also see, you know, it looks like there's a definite like power dynamic in the folks that have guns and are firing on the folks that don't have guns. There's obviously some privilege and marginalization of cultures within this, and the fact that it's a drawing, it could help get towards that distinguishing fact and opinion that, you know, is this really what happened because it's a drawing, or what?
Yeah.
So you see kind of this process is challenging, especially when you get to a critical level of viewing and parsing out the see, think, and wonder, and how a student might just use what they see and directly move right into the other two levels. So at any point in time as a teacher, you might, you know, put a pin in that and say, well, why? Why do you draw that conclusion? Why do you formulate that question? And then just keep pushing them back to, well, I see this color. Well, so what does that color tell you based on what we've learned or read before? So let's keep going.
Just looking at some other things that I see the text at the very top there in the upper left-hand corner, the bloody massacre, and then some other stuff that's not quite as legible.
Yeah, and for value sources, we would really have to go the bibliographic pages in the presentation, but this would be a good time to you know, go to that bibliographic information, see what the source is really about, maybe corroborate that source with something else.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I always think about when it's an artistic drawing is that, again, choices were made by the artist, and everything on the page was on purpose by an artist. And so you have to think about who was drawing it, for what purposes, what was the publication. To some extent, we know that, you know, is this propaganda? Is this a political cartoon?
So then absolutely stepping back again to what we think, we're certainly jumping ahead to all the questions that might be running through our mind, but let's go back to a few of the ideas that we think. What are you thinking in terms of the details and what's going on here?
I think this is happening at night.
And
I say that because I see a moon up in the left corner.
I think this is some sort of a putting down of a by a military unit because of the uniforms to more of a general public, because the people in the blue and green coats look like more like people who are just standing around in a crowd based on the artist representation of this. I also see that it looks like people on the left-hand side are bleeding and have wounds, whereas the people on the right-hand side, the red coats, people in the red coats look like they are not sustaining any sort of injury or have any blood or injury.
And it's important to recognize that these are inferences, that it might not be true, like Keith is saying, but it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because those are great inferences that are made, and those are things that you can use to go research and find out whether or not it's actually fact or opinion.
So
go ahead. I better jump in right here because I think that's essential. What Keith just led Kyle to kind of showcasing is the essence of inquiry-based learning. And it's certainly not about right or wrong or fact and details, but concept-based learning. And by getting our students to take risks and say, I think this really showcases where they're coming from and where they're headed, and allows us the opportunity to jump on board and help them learn as much as possible. So that's something really powerful to kind of consider.
Again, if you're going to make something, I was careful, if you're going to make a claim, back it with some sort of evidence, and whether that, it may not be true or not, but at least you had a reason for making a claim and supporting it with some evidence.
Yeah, and that being said, my claim, I think, this dog is prominent. There's distinct purpose in including the dog in the image, because I don't think it typically would be there, and dogs with all that gunfire going on, it would be scurrying, running, whatever, based on my background knowledge, right, as a kid would be challenged to do.
That's a great hook, thinking about it just as a student or as a teacher, present this source and say, especially if they haven't seen it before, just like the question that you ask them is, what's the dog doing? And then they can dig into all the other different visuals within the image and try to come to a conclusion about the dog.
So after all this thinking, and we've really tried to push ourselves into the see and then transitioning to the think, then we challenge our students to go into the wonder. What questions might you have about this with regard to critical viewing? So what questions could you create as a learner to showcase your understanding of viewing critically using these characteristics? What do you think?
Go ahead, Kyle.
I'm sort of wondering what area this is in, like where it happened, because the image in the back, or the building in the background, seems very, it looks like a main street kind of. So I'm wondering, like, what's the purpose of the setting?
And really looking at these points of distinguishing between fact and opinion and evaluating the source. So immediately we have to go back to remembering that this is a piece of art. It was drawing, and so there's interpretation by the artist. So we have to really take what we're seeing with a grain of salt and really corroborate it with other sources of information, which is really important when working with things of this nature. Taking an artist rendering as a piece of fact is kind of hard to do, and to just always keep that in mind, even if it's a historic document that you see a lot of. And then that just really gets into that evaluating the source and looking where this was published, who published it, what was the publication, what was the purpose of the publication, was it a news article, a secondary source in the time period, is it a piece of propaganda, And that would require us to dig a little further into maybe some of the text and put this particular document in context. If it was in a newspaper, what was a newspaper, when was it published, who published it, those sorts of things. I do see that handwritten down there. It does say published in 1770 by, I think it says Paul Revere. And so that helps you somewhat source it potentially. Again, you'd want to corroborate that with other sources, including the bibliographic information available at the Library of Congress.
You know, Keith brings up a really powerful point as he talks about, you know, fact and opinion and bias and perspective. And I would like to bring up the notion of, you know, where do bias and fact fit in the scheme of thinking? And something you could really challenge your students to do is think, okay, is this fact or opinion? Is there bias present if it is fact? If it is opinion, and how does that bias change? Because is it possible to relinquish bias in anything we do? Even if this were a photo, would it be biased?
Yeah, and the other, you know, we didn't go through the step, but appreciative is a good one for students to explore their own bias when they view something, and to understand, like, how do I view this? When, you know, how does it make me feel? How does it, what background knowledge does it come with? Does it enlighten in me? So that's a really good point, Raleigh.
Another thing about bias is it doesn't necessarily make it not useful, especially if it's a piece of propaganda. It's just another perspective on a historic event, and allows your students and yourself to kind of look at things from different angles and how they were perceived at the time of the events that occurred. So it might be good to pair this with some firsthand accounts of you know, maybe some of the people in the crowd wrote something in a diary, or maybe there was reports from the military side of things, and looking at all those holistically to create a greater idea of what was happening at the moment depicted in the image here.
Mm-hmm.
And even just researching certain people like that, Paul Revere. I think we know who he is, but will our students know who he is? And that'll be that's a good source of, you know, what's his bias.
So we've used this process with two different primary sources and walked through two different levels of viewing. Imagine using the same image and walking through both of these levels of viewing and helping students realize there are different ways to view the world around us, just like there are different ways to think about the world around us. So you heard us, you know, make some connections to the other levels of viewing. Think about the symbolism that's associated with this. I mean, I'm pretty sure the dog is some kind of symbol or representation that's deeper than just that image. So that would be connected directly to the precise level of viewing. So you might teach your students just each compartment, or you teach them to view using a see, think, wonder, or observe, reflect, question. And then like we referred to earlier, you know, kind of parse those details out into the categories of seeing, thinking, and wondering, as well as the categories of viewing. So later, remember, when you go back and you say, I want you to view this critically, then they think, oh, and they might even look up, or they need to look up at the anchor chart that you created for them, or the anchor chart that you show on the screen if you're remote teaching, or in their collection of documents, to help remember, okay, what does viewing critically entail? But think about this too. There are a lot of big words in this list, so it would be necessary to unpack that language through some language objectives before a lesson like this, and or after, because maybe you just set the stage for some kind of muddling through, what does this word mean, to help me get to the point of thinking about it critically. So really unpacking each of these levels. What does discriminative mean? What does precise mean? What does critical mean? And you can use something like a fourfold, which is a great tool to unpack specific words and or concepts, and give handles to those concepts for students to hold on to.
And just to build on that, Raleigh, it's good to note too, I think that levels of viewing isn't just, for a social studies or history classroom. I think this could be done, cross curricular. And I love the idea of this being in like a language arts classroom, for example, where you could have students, analyze this source and then take a perspective and write a short story from the perspective. Like, it would be really interesting to have a short story from the dog's perspective, for example.
Yeah, weave all that together. Like, this is the part of a powerful and engaging curriculum that you might use that teaches all subjects, right? Science, the math of this image, the language arts, as Kyle had suggested, and certainly the social studies element. So when you think about privilege dynamics and marginalization, like, how can you really use that to set the stage for the community you're trying to build in your classroom, whether remote or in four walls, and as a part of the greater community? So yeah, this is a drop in the bucket, but probably one of the most powerful drops in the bucket.
So if we move on, just to kind of keep going on this loop of inquiry and understanding what it means to kind of involve ourselves in this chaotic inquiry process, I think it's good now to stop and do some reflection. Right, Raleigh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you haven't been asking yourself these questions throughout, then certainly now is a great time to do so. And this is a part of the learning process that we would want to use with our own students in our own elementary classrooms as well. So, really the key to this, we were thinking, is that the questions that were being formulated would really kind of synthesize and showcase our understanding and or student understanding of each of the elements defining the level of listening. So how do the questions help illuminate the viewing level that you're focused on? How might the answers to those questions help guide students toward meeting the learning objectives, right? So some questions that would be logical and practical in asking ourselves and jotting down responses to and or verbalizing, right?
Yeah, and this is, it's not just good practice for us educators. It's good practice for your students too, to have them answer these types of questions. Like, how did going through the discriminative viewing level help you understand this source, more or less, or just help you understand it? So your students should reflect on this kind of process as well.
Yeah, let's take the opportunity now, Kyle, to kind of think about extensions. So how, after going through this learning experience with us, what ideas are coming to mind? Like, how could you use the levels of viewing and what kind of scenarios or situations could you create for your learners to challenge them, to scaffold them, to inspire them? Here are some ideas.
Yeah, and these are just a few ideas that we kind of came up with, and there's certainly 100 million other ideas that you can steal, borrow, and adapt to your own needs.
Think about how these apply to individual learning kind of modalities and interests and intelligences and who your students are as learners. And could you imagine the student that would just love finding a really weird image, right? A primary source, and showcasing it and trying to like stump their classmates or learning mates, like what's the sourcing of this image, or what viewing level am I trying to get you to focus on with this? Or and when you think about voice in writing, they showcase this image and they say, so based on my voice, how would I, or how might I look at this through what level of viewing based on how you know me as a learner?
Yeah, this is all
critical piece to this is the picture books that you can pair with these primary sources, and the picture books that you can use to teach these levels as well.
Yeah, tons of great extensions, and we are pretty much out of time. So I just wanted to actually had some additional remote learning extensions, but we're pretty short on time. So I would recommend just grabbing this presentation and looking through some of this stuff. just wanted to get to the end here. They have asked you to remind you to fill out your evaluations. This is a session L17. Title is there. Our contact information is also available there. We are happy to go into any sort of deep discussions about any of the stuff you've heard today, and happy to help in any way that you can come up with. And like I said, there is granting funds available if your organization is looking at doing some deeper work with the Library of Congress and incorporating these resources in your classroom. And I'll leave any final words to Raleigh and Kyle.
I think a key takeaway for you might be to really focus on the remote learning extensions that we have at the end of this session, and really help you make connections to what's possible in your situation right now, whether that be a kind of a hybrid model or a totally remote model. But essentially, you know, if you're completely in the classroom, thinking about this as a flipped kind of concept, you could really capitalize on this in many ways.
Yeah, and just, you know, the last thing I'll say is just think about the CCIRA theme about it being a journey, and that, you know, the journey isn't always straight and it's not always planned out, and sometimes it's good to get off track, or it's good to go down rabbit holes in primary sources to help spark and fulfill the student's curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or anything else for us. Thank you.